Meeting as always with our invocation. So if you choose to do so, please bow. Almighty God, as we begin the business of our county, we pause to recognize your presence in our lives. Renew a right spirit in each member of this board in order that we may approach each issue with patience, humility, and a sincere desire to do what is righteous in your sight. May we be ever mindful of our citizens and their needs and concerns, respectful of their life, liberty, and property as we strive to serve the greater good. Lord, I pray for the administrative staff and employees of this great county. Help them to realize the important role they play in the betterment of our community and that they are appreciated. We remember all those who serve and protect, whether at home or abroad. Shield them with your tender mercy and care. Lord, we know there are many among us who are suffering with personal trials. May they find comfort and renewal through your love and grace. Finally, Father, we know all things work together for good. For those who have received the showers, we give thanks and ask that if it be possible to bless us all with some continued welcome rain. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. We have a very special opportunity this evening. We have with us Jamie King, and he's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. We have some employee recognitions, and we'll begin with the introduction of our Facilities Division Director.
Well, apparently there was a miscommunication, and Mr. Boyd is not here, so we will put it on our next agenda. I apologize to the board for that.
No problem. We always take an opportunity to recognize those employees who have reached a level of tenure with the organization, and we'll do that at this time. We have Sandra Coble, Board of Elections, 5 years. Louis Villanella, Growth Management, 5 years. Michael Caldwell, Louis Grote, and Jonathan Simpson in Public Works with 5 years service. Charles Belk, Sarah Gallus, Mason Montgomery, and Lauren Ramsey in the Sheriff's Office with 5 years. And in Human Services, Amanda Shelton and Luke Henson with 5 years. 2 employees in the Sheriff's Office have completed 15 years of service with the county, Linda Broom and Carrie Zukowski. With 20 years service in Human Services, Jacqueline Deacon. And then we recognize our retiree, Gary DeSantis, in Human Services that worked with Union County for 10 years. So congratulations to all those dedicated employees. We appreciate that opportunity. As we were so skillfully led in the Pledge of Allegiance, we have with us tonight Jamie King, Eagle Scout from Troop 46 at Siler Presbyterian Church. And Jamie started scouting as a Tiger Cub in Cub Scouts and earned his Arrow of Light, which is the highest award for Cub Scouts. When he aged out, he bridged over to Troop 180 in Mooresville. And when his family moved to Weddington, he became a member of Troop 46. Since being involved with Scouts, Jamie has been on a number of camping trips, including Philmont, where he backpacked 80 miles in New Mexico. Through scouting, he has learned many skills that are useful in his day-to-day life. He recently earned the rank of Eagle Scout, and his Eagle Scout project was an outdoor classroom constructed at Cane Creek Park, consisting of 8 wooden benches and a podium positioned in a shaded area of one of the trails leading to the parking area at the main entrance. He shares his appreciation for the staff of Parks and Recreation for allowing him the opportunity to serve his community and his desire to be an Eagle Scout. So Jamie, if you'll come forward. I'm not going to take the opportunity to count. How many? 40-something. 40-something. from Union County. And I will, get one?
Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
I will give the same speech I give to all Eagle Scouts, is that it's been a long, hard road, but your leadership just now begins. And congratulations.
Thank you.
Item 6 is text amendments to our UDO.
Yes, Chairman and Commissioners, we have a number of text amendments to our Unified Development Ordinance. And Mr. Matthews and Mr. Jensen will be reviewing those with you this evening. I think they'll be taking each of them at a time and giving you a little bit of background as to why they are recommending those particular amendments. We're not recommending that the board take any action this evening, but just to conduct the public hearing.
Okay.
Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. I know we've got a full agenda, so we will do our best to try and answer your questions and take not too much of your time. I want to recognize, again, Jamie King. He's actually the son of one of our employees here. Jim King is with my office here, so very proud of Jamie and with his family. So I just want to recognize them, say thank you for all that they do.
Great.
Just to give you a little background, I think if you read in some of the work for this, you would have found that there is a big discrepancy between when we started some of these text changes and getting to you. Part of these text changes went to the planning board back in August of 2017, and then the most recent ones went to the board in May of this year. The reason for that time lag is that the ones that are the oldest were really more cleanup items. They weren't necessarily time sensitive. The one that was really the issue that we wanted to make sure we got right was our zoning permits, because again, we wanted to make sure that was correct. We worked with our legal staff in getting that to the point it was ready to bring to you. And that's sort of the reason for the time delay. We just didn't feel like we needed to bring the other ones to you necessarily on kind of a time period. So they're broken into sections. What I want to do is go through each section, and if you have questions, please stop me. They're identified through Roman numerals. So Roman numeral 1, those are the items that are really more clarifications to the current ordinance, issues that we've looked at that need to be corrected. Item number 2 is actually a text change that has to do with an issue that we learned from an applicant that wanted to do something in the county. We realized that that probably needed to be addressed in a text change. Item number 3 is the actual zoning permits. And then item number 4 is something we're recommending have to do with our accessory uses. So I'll begin, and then Mr. Jensen will come in. He'll do part of it. The reason we're doing this is these were authored by different people. We kind of actually did the authoring of these. First one, again, these are more clarifications, starting with table 5-2 in the R district. What we're asking for here is a clarification of what we have as far as our lot coverage. In the ordinance, it does say 40%, but it's not clear that that actually applies to both accessory and principal structure. We're making that clear within the table that lot coverage for any lot is no greater than 40%. We're also stipulating what the corner yard setback is within here. That's half the distance of the street on the front side. You'll see that in each one of those. That's half. That was not clear in the ordinance. We wanted to make that clear. And we had also suggested an item where we are recommending that the height for non-residential structures within the residential district be allowed to go up to 50 feet. The reason for that is we oftentimes have churches, schools, other non-residential uses that are allowed by right. They exceed 35 feet in a lot of cases. And we had situation where we've had to at least address that. We think that 50 feet is certainly reasonable when it comes to those non-residential uses. That does not apply to houses or accessory buildings within homes. Those still have to meet the height requirement or height restriction, 35 feet as far as those uses go. And anytime you have a question, please just stop me. I'm just gonna go until you have a question. Next item is table 5-R. This has to do with cluster developments. We are again clarifying here that the corner setback is half the distance of the street setback. That was really just a clarification on the cluster developments. Cluster developments are already allowed within our ordinance, but this is just a clarification for side yard setbacks. The following diagrams are really nothing more than showing you what these numbers mean. So S1, S2, S3, or your L1s, L2. This is just reflecting what those are. S2 is a side yard setback, S1 is a front or street, S4 is a corner, S3 is a rear. That's just giving you some clarification of what that is. We're not necessarily changing anything, we're just making a clarification of what those are. The next item has to do with dependent care residence temporary. There is already a state statute which allows for certain types of temporary dependent care facilities. That's not what this is addressing. This is for anyone who is going above and beyond with that state statute. And the county already had a provision in our ordinance where we allow temporary care residents before the statutes were amended to allow that. And that required a special use permit process. I'd go to the Board of Adjustment. The applicant had to show that there was some type of a hardship, and financial is not a hardship. It usually has to do with some physical or to do with health issues. Once they could show that, then they could get a temporary permit for a dependent care residence. That would have to be updated every 6 months to see that that hardship still exists. In this particular one, what we're doing is we're clarifying that, number one, this does not apply to the general statutes requirements, which are specific and they're allowed. We don't regulate that. And that this would now be switched from a special use permit to a staff initiated. One of the reasons for that is the Board of Adjustment actually made that suggestion. They felt that this would be more appropriate for the staff to issue these temporary permits and regulate them, as opposed to making these applicants have to pay an $800 fee, come to the Board of Adjustment to ask for that. We thought that that was a good solution, so that's why this is being requested at this time. All right, the next item has to do with additions to principal structures. In doing zoning, we often get people with creative solutions to things that they want to do. And one of the items that we often hear is, how can I add to my existing home? I want to do an addition. And we've had people say, well, I want to build a garage. My garage is not attached to my house, but I want to call it an addition. And in that, I want to meet the setbacks for the addition and not meet setbacks for an accessory structure. We had people say that I'm going to build my garage, it's going to be 50 feet away from my house, and I'm going to attach it with a breezeway. We didn't consider that to be an addition. So what we wanted to establish are some minimum criteria for why an actual building would qualify as an addition. You can have a breezeway. That breezeway can be no greater than 25 feet from the house. Has to be a minimum of 6 feet wide. It actually has to have openings on both buildings. We think that's reasonable. And also we stipulate that if you are actually attaching it to the home, you have to have a minimum of at least 10 feet of the home structure that you're attaching to. And it's not just corner to corner. You're actually attaching it to the home so that it is really truly an addition. And that's what that clarification is for, to provide us with some standards for when someone comes in and says, well, I want to call this an addition. All right. The next one has to do with rural home occupations. We have 2 types of home occupations in the county. We have a suburban, which is usually very limited as far as the types of uses that are allowed in there. And then you have the rural home occupations, which will allow you a little bit more intensity for your rural home occupations. In that, it provides that you can have up to There's some area for size of that. Well, we wanted to clarify in the rural home occupations that number one, that only one rural home occupation is allowed per resident. Number two, that we do actually have some limit as far as the space. Current ordinance just says that the rural home occupation cannot exceed 3,000 square feet in an accessory building. But that has nothing to do with the size of the house. We're stipulating in here that it can be up to 3,000 square feet in accessory building, but it's the lesser of that and 75% of the gross floor area of the dwelling. That way you're providing at least some restrictions on that size. We're also asking that we limit the total area that you can have for outside storage to no more than 1,500 square feet. And we're also suggesting that animal boarding businesses be excluded as a home occupation. As you may be aware, we had a recent issue with that particular item. We wanted to make it clear that that is an excluded use as a home occupation. Doesn't mean that someone can't apply for a special use permit for animal boarding business, but we think that's more appropriate. Public's notified, it can be part of the process, and conditions can be placed as opposed to just a home occupation permit. Okay. Next item has to do really with signage. So we've had several situations where in our residential district for non-residential uses, the sign limitation was somewhat of a constraint. This applies to churches, other non-residential uses. The one example was a church. Current regulations will allow you to only have 16 total square feet for signage for a non-residential use in a residential district. We felt that that was a little burdensome. We're suggesting that it be no greater than 125 square feet. There are some maximums, obviously, that's the maximum, but it's really based on the total wall area that you have. And that those signs can actually face the public entrance or an entrance to where you have a street that corresponds with the address. And we think that that's reasonable. A lot of churches do want to have a sign that identifies what they have there and also some of the other non-residential uses that are there. The next item has to do with signage for business type activities in your office, commercial, industrial zoning districts. That really relates to the number of wall signs. Current regulations actually say you can only have one wall sign. There are plenty of limitations on the square footage that you can have, but it's stipulated you could really only have one. And we felt that that really didn't make a lot of sense. We thought that if you have a limitation on the total square footage of a wall sign, it shouldn't matter to us whether that's 2 signs or 3 signs or 1 sign. As long as they don't exceed the square footage for the signage, that they're allowed to split that along that wall area if they choose to. And that's what that actually does. There still is a reference to the amount of square footage that they can exceed, and there's location requirements for where those signs can be placed. It's at a public entrance or it's at a side where the property is addressed for those walls. Next one has to do with development standards. We currently do have a development guide that we provide to the public, but it's not clear in the ordinance that we have the ability to actually create that, and we wanted to make it clear that that is not an ordinance itself. All it is we assemble administrative items like checklists, forms, and general information about the process. We provide that to the applicant. We do not come back to the board for changes for that because those are not ordinance items. They are merely nothing more than administrative items. But we wanted to make it clear in both item 60 as well as item 80 that we do have the ability to create the development guide and provide that to the citizens. It's not an ordinance, it's really nothing more than a guide. Next we have notices for variances. And I think Lynn will appreciate this. Currently, the ordinance requires that the county clerk is the one that actually has to notify property owner of the decision from a Board of Adjustment action. There are some statutory requirements where the county clerk has to do certain notices. In this isn't a statutory requirement, it was just in our ordinance. We feel this is better served by having our UDO administrator serve that purpose. So this would relieve Lynn from having to serve in that. It would also stipulate how delivery can be made as far as the variance notice goes. We also have an item for appeals for decisions. And this one, we wanted to make it very clear that if someone is appealing a decision and it is specific to a piece of property, that we are not only providing notice via mail, but we're also providing some type of a signage to allow adjacent property owners to know that there is an appeal in process. So we have to post the property, let the adjacent property owner know that there's an appeal in process and how they can contact us. So that is stipulating how an appeal on a specific site might actually be notified to the general public. The next item has to do with the notice of decision for appeals. Same similar situation. We're suggesting that the county clerk be removed from that duty, placed out of the UDO administrator, so that that person could handle that. We feel that it's better served in that person's role. Next item has to do with fines and civil penalties. In this, ultimately, when we have a violation, our goal is to get the violation corrected. It's not to collect money. We have fines and penalties within our ordinance. That's usually what we go to try and prompt a citizen or a resident to actually adhere to our regulations. But the ultimate goal isn't to try and collect money. We're asking for the board to consider having the planning director be able the authority to waive any civil penalties related to a violation if it has been voluntarily corrected by the property owner. I did speak with Commissioner Helms about this. He brought up a very good point in that we probably should have some standards for how we arrive at that. I think that's a good idea. Did not have time to make any changes to that at this point in time. And those standards wouldn't necessarily be part of the ordinance. They would be part of the administrative guide. But I think it's a good idea for us to have some standards involved with how we arrive at whether we waive the penalty or not. Written notice. Again, this is under notice of the violation. Current general statutes do not require for the county to send notices of violation by certified mail. Our ordinance requires that, but statutes do not require it. You can mail a notice of violation by first-class mail. We're recommending that we change this to follow the statutes, and that is mail the notice by first-class mail. Now, as a matter of practice, if we're having difficulty getting a hold of someone or getting a response, we will often mail out a certified letter or certified notice just so that we can document that we've attempted to contact that person. Even though we've mailed it by first-class mail, if we've gotten no response from the individual, by practice we usually send a certified letter out just so that we have something in the file. That is not being suggested as a requirement. That is just a matter of practice. We're just suggesting that we follow statutes for first-class mail. The next item has to do with our table of setback encroachments. The ordinance does allow for certain items to actually encroach within the side and rear setbacks within the county. What we have noticed is that language in other parts of the ordinance which are written are in conflict to what the table has, specifically for accessory uses and structures. Our language in the ordinance allows those types of uses to encroach into the side, into the rear setback. But if you'll notice, previously that was said, that was no. This is to clarify that those uses would be allowed to encroach as long as they comply with Article 35, which has to do with accessory uses and accessory structures. The next item is actually Mr. Jensen's. I'm going to get him to come up here and talk to you about those text changes. And then after he's done, I'll come back up and I'll finish the rest. Any questions for me at this point?
Roman numeral 2 is regarding some text changes broke down into two categories, minor and major. The primary difference in those two has to do with parking, lighting, and sound. So if you have amplified sound, or you have, I think it's more than 50 spaces, or you have lights more than 20 feet tall, then you fall into a major outdoor entertainment spectator sports category. The current ordinance requires a separation, an automatic separation, or for minor it's 200 feet from the nearest adjacent R-zone property, and for major it's 500 feet. Through several conversations with some applicants, we have agreed with them that we thought that having an alternative compliance method was a good idea. So instead of bringing a bunch of different text amendments to you guys, we decided that we would actually take that in-house and write that ourselves. So what we've come up with has been some collaborative efforts with us and some applicants, but we're presenting this as a staff-initiated amendment. For most of these, so instead of meeting that hard and fast 200 or 500 foot buffer, we're proposing that you could do a study to show that with amplified sound, you'll maintain a level below 65 decibels, and with lighting, you'll meet the minimum ordinance standards that are currently in effect, which is half a foot candle measured at the property line to any R-zone lot. We've got a couple of other examples in the ordinance where we allow alternative compliance methods. One is under 55.120, which is landscaping, and the other one is under section 45, which is our parking standards. And in both those cases, you can do a study to show that the alternative method that you're requesting still meets the requirements and intent of the ordinance. So we feel like this kind of falls in line with what some of our other ordinance sections already have. And one thing I'll point out here in your packets, that red underline should be a strike through, just to clarify on B. And that's the extent of that. Do you have any questions of me?
Thank you, Lee.
All right, so continuing, going to the next level of request. These really have to do with the zoning permit that I mentioned earlier. This is the item number 3, or Roman numeral 3. The current ordinance does speak to a zoning permit, but what it does not do is stipulate when a zoning permit is required, and it really doesn't provide any process for that. And we worked with our legal staff and coming up with how could we make it clear within the ordinance when a permit was required and how the process actually works. So first off, what we started with is the article, section 25, which really has to do with the table of uses. And in here, we're stipulating that any principal use within the table of uses must have a zoning permit. So that is, if anyone's building a new house, or they're building, something within that, or they're starting a use that's within there, they have to have a zoning permit for us to determine that they are actually meeting the requirements of the ordinance. And we think that's important. We were issuing permits for these types of things before, but there wasn't anything clear in the ordinance that we really had the authority to handle it that way. So we want to make it clear that we do require a zoning permit for principal uses within the county. We also extended that to accessory. What we also found is that there are a number of sections where zoning permit is appropriate. And so for accessory uses and accessory structures, we want to make sure that it is very clear that zoning permits are required for those uses, because those are not principal uses, they're accessory. So if you just said I was going to put it under principal uses, then you would miss zoning permit requirements for all those accessory types. That also includes home occupations. Someone wants to do a home occupation, it's not that you can't do it. We want to make sure that you know what the requirements are, and we can guarantee, we can at least determine that you are meeting those standards. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm looking at these and just curious about the agricultural use. Can you go back, on my screen here, can you go down some,
This way?
that other way?
That way.
So,
You wanna look at this table here?
farm stands, keeping the horses,
Yes.
how does that get involved with agricultural use? And-
Good question. So, unfortunately, these are bookmarks which tie to that's why that says error in there. Any farm-related, building, whether it's principal or accessory, as long as it meets the farm exemption, there is no zoning permit or zoning requirement. State statutes exempt bona fide farms from anything to do with a zoning permit. Now, if you do not meet those requirements, then any use is still an accessory. Whether you're keeping of horses, and that doesn't fall under the bona fide farm, it's still an accessory building or accessory use. You still have to meet the zoning requirements. There are some setback requirements for, say, a stable, if it doesn't meet the bona fide farm requirement. But if it meets the bona fide farm requirement, there are no setback requirements.
And the farm stands, would that be like, just vegetable stand, fruit
Yes, sir.
stand?
Yes, sir. That's what that would apply to.
Okay, so, this doesn't affect things that are already built in the county, it affects us going forward, right?
That's correct, yes, sir. So anything that already exists, as long as it exists, it would be considered grandfathered or a non-conforming use, which is allowed non-conforming use. More questions on that?
No, thank you.
As I was indicated, there's some other sections that really have to do with the zoning permit. I talked about accessory. The other one is parking. Identified that oftentimes, let's say a commercial building is built, we do not require, that they put all of, their wanted parking. They have some minimum parking requirements that they have to do, but they may want to do in excess of that. If they want to do some excess of it, we need to make sure that they get a permit and that we can at least verify that they're meeting the requirements of the parking standards if they're wanting to ultimately exceed that. And that's really what that item has to do with. Anyone who's maybe doing parking at some later date and they're going to expand what they have to get a zoning permit, we have to verify that they're meeting the requirements, setbacks, stormwater, anything to do with landscaping, we'll do all of that at that time. That also holds true under, landscaping. Landscaping item, that's what this, I'm sorry, outdoor lighting, not landscape, outdoor lighting. This section applies specifically to outdoor lighting. We have some similar situations where lighting is not required. Someone wants to provide outdoor lighting on their commercial property and they decide later to install lighting. We want them to come to us so that we can determine that their lighting meets our standards. We have a foot candle requirement that they're not supposed to exceed on adjacent properties. We have some height limitations for the lighting poles, and the permit is to allow us to regulate that more easily, as far as the applicant goes. All right. Lastly, well, I'll make sure that's the last one. All right. So what we have here is actually a change to our definition section. And that was to clarify what we actually call athletic facility outdoor. Within the body of the text change there, that is referenced. In meeting with our legal staff, they felt that we needed to clarify what we meant by an outdoor athletic facility. What this is saying is, if someone has a basketball goal, that's not an outdoor athletic facility. If someone has a basketball court, that is an outdoor athletic facility. So it's really more related to more intense, more large-scale type projects. Again, we talk about baseball fields, basketball courts, tennis courts. It's not that you can't have them, it's identifying that we're calling those specifically outdoor facilities, athletic facilities. Again, if you have an individual batting cage that your son or daughter uses, that's not considered an outdoor athletic facility. If you have several, that could certainly lead you into having what's defined as an outdoor standards that you have to meet if you go to that level. So that's what that text change is referencing. The next item under zoning permits, and this is the last item under zoning permits, has to do with the process. We've stipulated in here how the process works, and there's really sort of two processes. There's really one that deals with mostly the residential side of it, someone building a home, an accessory building on residentially zoned property, and then there's the commercial side, where they're wanting to establish a commercial business, they're wanting to build commercial property, and there are different standards that apply to that. The time links are different. We typically usually can meet a zoning permit for residential in 48 hours or less. For commercial, it's gonna take longer. It's a bigger review time for a commercial type project. This lays out what our process is for the zoning permit within the ordinance. All right, that's the end of everything related to zoning permits. The last item that we have has to do with our accessory units, accessory dwelling units, and also home occupations. In the beginning, we talked about accessory temporary dwelling units. This is different. This is permanent. This is anyone who wants to establish an accessory dwelling unit that is permanent within our ordinance. We already have provisions where we allow that within the ordinance, and there's some stipulations. It has to be no greater than 50% of the size of the principal structure. It has to be constructed. It cannot be a mobile home. There are certain standards that they have to meet. But one of the things that we did note is that it was limited in certain residential districts. You could only do it in residential districts where a duplex was allowed. And there were at least two, I believe 3 residential districts where duplexes weren't allowed, which would mean you could not have an accessory dwelling unit within those zoning districts. We didn't think that that was really the intent. We felt that the intent of the ordinance was to allow accessory dwelling units on any property that was residential. So we're actually suggesting that the board consider allowing those under all R and RA zoning districts, and that's what that particular change addresses. The last one has to do again with rural home occupations, and this in particular one, we are suggesting that number one, we actually increase the size from 100,000 square feet, that's about 2.5 acres, to 5 acres, and that we stipulate that those are in the RA 40 and RA 200 zoning districts. The reason for that is that rural home occupations, as I mentioned before, are more intense in nature. There's a greater square footage that you can use. You can have up to 3 employees that don't live in the home work in there, and there's some activities on rural home occupations that can create some potential issues with adjacent property owners. We felt that a 5-acre minimum is more appropriate for those kinds of uses. This does not mean that you cannot have a suburban home occupation in an RA 40 or RA 200. You can, provided you meet those standards for suburban home occupation. This is just stipulating that for the additional standards where you're going to have a more intense use, it has to be in these zoning districts and at least 5 acres. And then the other item, which I think was also included, is that we would limit where animal boarding services would not be allowed as a rural home occupation. Those are the extent of the suggested tax changes. As the manager indicated, we are not requesting that the board take any action. We know this is a lot for you to think about and consider. You may have some questions, and we may have some additional clarification that we bring to you, but I'm here tonight to answer any questions you might have about this request.
Mr. Hale, sure.
Thank you. Brian, on the previous subject matter, just one back on the accessory building or the
accessory dwelling unit, yes, sir.
yeah, accessory dwelling. So that's saying if I've got an acre, I can have 2 homes on it?
You can have, well, we don't define it as a home, but technically it is a place that someone could reside. So it could be a smaller home, absolutely. So let's say you had a 3,000 square foot house.
Mm-hmm.
You could literally build a 1,500 square foot home on on that property if you wanted to, as long as you, number one, it was 50% of the size, and you don't exceed the total square footage of accessory buildings for that zoning district. So.
That's basically your 40% of
Yeah,
the lot
well,
size.
The actual square footage is a sliding scale. So anything that's 2 acres or less can only have the same amount of size as the house. So you got a 3,000 square foot house, you can only have 3,000 square foot of accessory buildings. If you go 2 to 4, it goes up to 125%. 4 to 7, it goes to 150%. And if you get over 10 acres, you can have unlimited square footage. So it's a sliding scale. The bigger the property, the more accessory building square footage you can have. But on an acre, your example, if you have a 3,000 square foot house, you could have a 1,500 square foot accessory dwelling unit, and you could have another 1,500 square foot garage, if that's what you wanted.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
And I'd like to say I appreciate you taking time to go on over with these with several of the commissioners ahead. It's very beneficial. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Anything further for Brian? Hearing none, we will open the public hearing. And we have no one signed up to speak this evening, so we will close the public hearing. That will bring us to our informal comments. And we have no one signed up to speak this evening. So that will take us to our addition, deletion, and adoption of our agenda. Mr. Helms?
I'd ask that we move item number 11 to old business for discussion.
Commissioner Akers?
Approve the agenda as amended.
We have a motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you. Motion to approve consent as amended. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Takes us to old business.
Which item would you like me to address first?
We'll make the Richard's request
Item
35A. So we'll go with the school board issue first.
As the board may recall, back in May of 2017, they came forward with a request to provide what is known as the old Fairview Elementary for the use of the town of Fairview. At that point in time, the board provided direction to the Board of Education that they needed more specific information in order to be compliant with the requirements of state statute. County staff has looked at this. We have no use for that particular facility, and therefore we would recommend and decline the exercise the opportunity to obtain a portion and allow them to move forward with the town of Fairview.
Commissioner Akins?
I make a motion that we decline our opportunity to obtain a portion of Union County Board of Education and allow them to move forward with their lease to the town of Fairview.
We have a motion. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. 35A, Richard.
Okay. This is the Yadkin Basin Waterline Extension Assessment. It's listed as a task order. My understanding, there was insufficient replies to
We advertised it and we received no responses at all. So we went to one of our existing engineers under contract, Black and Beach, asked them to provide us with a scope of services to perform this work, and that is what is on the agenda.
Okay. Well, I would make a motion that we go back through the process of the RFP and to get a independent group to make this assessment for us. And it may be a little more work to get an RFP acknowledgements, but I think that would be in our best interest.
We have a motion, discussion. Commissioner Rushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would be supportive of that as well. I think that, you know, just putting it out for bid, if they don't come back, I think we have a little bit of time that we can, do here, but I would like some bids on that just to see what we're looking at. So I'd support the motion.
Just to make the motion maker aware, to go out for request for proposal, receive responses, and evaluate any responses we may receive is probably about a 4-month process.
Well, my understanding is this process is 6+ anyway.
To do the actual study?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I still maintain my motion.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
I believe that takes us to new business.
Yes, Chairman and Commissioners, the first item is to name a commissioner to the Yadkin River Water Supply Project Advisory Board. This is a board that was established when we entered into the agreement with the town of Norwood with respect to our partnership. And within our agreement, it does stipulate that there will be 2 members from the elected officials of each of the municipality as well as the county. And with the resignation of Mr. Lance Simpson, we do have a vacancy.
Commissioner Helms.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Rushing to fulfill this position.
Any further nominations?
I'd like to nominate Barbara Harrison.
Any further?
Is that assuming that the nominees accept the nomination?
Would Commissioner Rushing or Commissioner Harrison like to decline their nomination?
I would like to decline.
Accept that, Commissioner Amos?
Well, I don't guess I have.
Okay. We have Commissioner Rushing suggests to be the other commissioner to participate in that Town of Norwood effort. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you. 37 is bond referendum, bond orders and resolutions.
Yes, Chairman and Commissioners, during your budget adoption, staff was directed to move forward with a general obligation bond referendum to appear on the November 2018 ballot. That is what is before you this evening, to introduce the bond orders and adoption of the resolution for the County of Union. The facilities include the 4-H pavilion at $9.745 million. The public safety bonds total $42,160 million, which includes the sheriff's facility as well as the emergency services facility. Scott Leo, our bond counsel, is here this evening to answer any process questions, and staff is available to answer any other questions as it relates to the specific projects.
They're simply going to respond to questions. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Unless you request a presentation. We do not have one prepared, but we can wing it if necessary.
I didn't want to miss anything. I just want to be sure. Questions from the board?
No question, can we make a motion
No,
to proceed?
you can.
Introduction of bond orders and adoption of the resolution of the County of Union, North Carolina regarding bond orders authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds, setting public hearing thereon, and directing publication of a notice of said public hearings.
We have a motion, discussion. I would just like to make one comment with regard to this. I'm not to beat a dead horse. I may have gotten the reputation for being Dr. No on these bond efforts. That's not that I'm against the project. I'm against the process, and I'm against the information provided. I was concerned when we voted for the school bonds that we didn't have accurate information, and as a result, it turned out to be the case. I was concerned about the fact that we voted $10 million bond for the library when we'd had no presentation. We had no background on the project. It could have been 10 million, it could have been 20 million, it could have been 5 million. How can you vote for a specific bond amount when you have no idea of the project? I have mixed emotions about this one. I certainly have always been a proponent of providing adequate facilities there for the sheriff and his department. I have no qualms with that, and certainly we're well past due with renovations, or not renovations, but a new 911 center. We've known that for a long time. The 4-H pavilion is certainly near and dear to my heart. It was a project that I've worked long and hard for. During the process, there were suggestions made and concerns raised about what that facility ought to look like. And I suggested that what was being suggested is totally different in scope, and we may need to go back to the drawing board. We have a number of right at $10 million for this project, and we spent a lot of time with stakeholders, and we came through that process with what we thought was an adequate facility to meet the needs that those stakeholders had identified. Other needs were identified and suggested. And I say this only with a word of caution. I'm going to support the motion, but I was at an event this weekend visiting with some producers from Randolph County. Their Board of Commissioners is fixing to make a decision on adding a bond referendum item for an agricultural facility, pavilion facility, livestock facility. Certainly not apples and oranges, but certainly with some of the same amenities and items that were discussed. The designers came up with their first figure, $65.4 million. They've pared it back. It's going to be a $55 million bond item. So, I'm not sure what the scope of this project is desired to be, or wished to be, or changed, or whatever. But I think there's a disparity between what some of the board are wishing to see constructed and what the actuality is. So I simply wanted to raise that issue in that regard. Commissioner Rushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in the past, I have also agreed that, especially with the unknown coming, I remember back in 2006 when a very large school bond was being suggested. I couldn't support it because of the pending issues coming from Department of Water Quality and what was going on with our sewer situation in Union County and the limiting, and then the economy came in, so a lot of uncertainty came in. And I just assure you that, by letting the voters choose with this, much like they've done in other school issues, library, SPCC, I think they'll make the right decision. I believe that voters will support this. I think it's something that the agriculture community, I think it's something that the voters in this county, as far as the use of the agriculture center, when people said that wouldn't be used, I think that's been proven wrong over and over again. It's been a very popular facility, and and I think this will be as well, and I think the voters will support it, I hope they will, because I sure support it as you do. And, you know, if there's any hesitation in supporting, I would hope that you wouldn't have, and I think this is the right thing to do for Union County, and I hope the voters agree with us.
Further discussion? All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Appointments to boards and committees.
Yes, your first appointment is the Nursing Home Advisor Committee, as noted on your agenda. There was a change in law which changed the process of how these appointments occur. The applications are received through the clerk's office, and then we forward them to the Central Ida Council of Governments, where they do an additional evaluation of the applicant. And then the clerk is notified once an applicant goes through that process. There was an application received from a Claudia Sandoval for the Nursing Home Advisory Committee, and the Central Ida Council of Governments has requested that she be appointed.
Thank you. Move to appoint Ms. Sandoval. All in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you. Juvenile Crime Prevention Council. Mr. Ritchie, Ralph Ritchie's term expired on June 30th, and he has submitted his application for reappointment.
Motion to approve Mr. Ritchie's, application.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. Region F, Aging Advisory Committee. Kathleen Demansky's term expired on June 30. This is her first full term on the committee, and she's eligible for reappointment.
Motion to reappoint Kathleen Dominski.
We have a motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. South Piedmont Community College, Gary Summerfield's term on the Board of Trustees expired on June 30. The position's been advertised, and we have received Gary Summerfield, James Wilton, and Monica York.
Motion to reappoint Gary Summerfield.
We have a motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Union County Agricultural Board, Steve Hegler has served diligently on that board. His term expired in June of 2018. He has submitted his application for reappointment, and no other applications have been received, so I will move that we reappoint Steve Hegler to the Ag Advisory Board. All in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask a question while we're on this subject.
Yes, sir?
Brian, what's going on with there's something with the planning board? Are you in need of members there? We got a notice this week that there was some trouble getting planning board members enough for a quorum.
Yes, sir, we currently, have 3 vacancies. We have 1 regular member vacancy, we have 1 regular member, slot vacancy and 2 alternate slot vacancies. Unfortunately, with some of the vacations and different things going, we've had a little difficulty with some quorums here recently, but we do still have those vacancies on that board.
We used to have fights to get on that committee, so.
Yes, sir, I don't know what's going on.
So would it be appropriate to let him ask the public to please apply for those positions?
We do advertise them, and we've also suggested that board members, if they have individuals that they think may be appropriate for that board, that they certainly reach out to them.
So once again, you need one regular member and.
1 regular member and 2 alternatives, and 2 alternates, and it's a great board, so hopefully someone will be interested in it. We've got a lot of stuff going on.
And I apologize, I had mentioned this to Richard to bring it onto this agenda and then totally forgot.
Okay.
Thank you.
My
Well,
husband.
Just clarification, we've had conversations with the clerk on several occasions and have been moving in that direction. We just haven't got there yet. All righty. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
The last item is your child fatality prevention team appointments and annual reports. We are recommending that we do something a little different than the board's normal procedures, where the Department of Human Services has actually put forward a list of individuals that they would like appointed to this particular board, and this is the board that reviews active cases of child abuse, neglect, and in cases in which a child has died as a result of suspected abuse and neglect. So we have not advertised through our normal process. What we are recommending is that the board suspend Rule 32 of your board rules and procedures in notifying the public of the vacancies and appoint the recommended agency staff and community representatives.
Commissioner Akins?
Is there a concern on timing on this?
We meet quarterly, so.
Please come up, I'm sorry, Janet, if you could just come up to the microphone.
The board meets, the team meets quarterly, and so these appointees meet quarterly. The last meeting was last month, so we do have 2 months until the next scheduled meeting. The state could call for, us to do a review if there were something that were urgent in nature, but we don't expect that to occur.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Janet.
Commissioner Akins?
I would, I think given the history in this county, I would like to see these positions, posted to ensure that we have all of the, opportunity to review any applicant that may have an interest, to make sure and certain that we're not missing any, credible or viable opportunities to put someone that's well qualified from the community on this board.
We have a motion, discussion. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, none. County managers, comments.
No comments this evening?
Commissioner Harrison. Commissioner Akins.
No comments.
Commissioner Rushing.
No comments.
Commissioner Helms.
I'd just like to say, I appreciate the citizens that participated in the reviews of the roundabouts on 200 and 218. We had a very large turnout, between 75 and 100 at each thing, and I appreciate it. They were overwhelmingly asking to be included in the discussion earlier in the process, but we had, I appreciate them taking time to come and share with us. So, thank you.
I have no further comments and offer a motion to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.